Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I hope you've all had a great week so far. In today's episode, we're of course going to be talking all about the issues of inbreeding and Islam and the consequences of that on children, on families, but also across society. And then we're going to be looking at Christian societies and asking the question of why it is that these two different civilizations are so drastically different, and really tracing back the lineage of ideas and belief systems back to their source. Because one of the things I'm fascinated with is the way in which different belief systems afford drastically different realities downstream from those beliefs, and this video is no exception. So let's look at the countries that have inbreeding rates that are just sky high. And you'll notice that all of these are Islamic. So we're going to look at Pakistan. So Pakistan is right around this part of the world. And what we see is an average inbreeding rate of 65%. And pretty much all of these, most of these, are between first cousins. And again, this is all compounded. This isn't a one-off thing. This is happening generationally, where you have, let's say, a couple get together. They are cousins, but both of their parents are also cousins, and then both of their grandparents on each side are cousins as well. And then you go on and on and on up the family tree, doubling and doubling and doubling, are all seeing cousin marriages generationally. And of course, this is compounding the effects of birth defects and cognitive decline. We do see the lowering of IQ across the board as a result of this. And we're seeing babies being born with very severe deformations of the brain, of the skull, of the body, limbs missing, genitals or organs in the wrong place, and so on. And it's tragic, and my heart aches for them. And one of the reasons why I want to make this video is because there is such a poor education on this, where the entire Islamic world, we are talking upwards of 1.5, 2 billion people, almost, it's not quite 2 billion people, are basically believing that first cousin marriage is perfectly fine and actually a good thing, and actually a revelation from Allah, because Muhammad said so. And in fact, before we show any more of this map, and it does get stark and scary, let's just watch this quick video here from Sheikh Asim Al-Hakim, which I've already done a response to in a previous video when it comes to Muhammad and child marriage. But I think this is very, very telling when it comes to the Islamic attitude. So let's just check it out.
When science comes and says cousins must not get married to one another, we do not look at science and neglect our own religion. So we look in the Qur'an, it doesn't say anything about that. We look into the Sunnah, there's no prohibition, none whatsoever about that. On the contrary, we find that the Prophet himself, alayhi salatu wasalam, married his cousin, Zainab bin Jahsh, the mother of the believers, may Allah be pleased with her. If there was anything wrong, he would not have done that. Or Allah would have told us that this is not recommended.
Right.
Not only that, he gave his own daughter Fatima to his own cousin Ali ibn Abi Talib. He also gave Zainab, his own daughter, the daughter of Muhammad, to her cousin Abu al-Asim al-Rabi'. And they were all their maternal cousins. So the whole of Islamic history has nothing against cousins marrying one another. So when science comes and says, oops, this is not recommended, this is not permissible or advisable, we, with all due respect, throw it in the dustbin. They say, oh, you will be responsible for any genetic diseases that come. Well, we've seen total strangers marrying from the East and the West, having children with genetic diseases. So this is not a criteria that you can judge by, and this is why we ignore it.
Wow. To your detriment. I don't think this guy is very smart, because it's like he's not understood the difference between like statistical probability. It's like, well, because people that are completely unrelated can still encounter health issues in their babies, therefore cousin marriage is absolutely fine, despite it drastically increasing your risk. It's like, well, there's this person that walked into oncoming traffic at high speed and was perfectly fine, therefore walking into high-speed traffic is perfectly fine. This is the issue we're talking about him. And so what's amazing is the guy's so close to getting it. It's like, well, Allah wouldn't have given it to us if it was bad, right? So therefore it must be good. It's like, or it actually is bad, and you're believing something false. So close to getting it, but then misses it by a mile. So let's go back to the list of countries. We can see when it comes to Kuwait, we are seeing the rate of 54%, UAE 54%, Sudan also very high, 63%, Afghanistan about 50%, 49%, Iraq 46%, Bahrain, Oman, these are all around 46%, 36%. Jordan is up to 32%. The sort of Gaza and the West Bank are seeing about 32%, Lebanon 25%, and so on. And then we see when you go to Morocco, that's about 26% over here. Algeria 34%, Tunisia 32%, Libya 38%, and Mauritania over here 47%. Inadvertently, Mauritania has a booming slave trade justified by Islam, and it's horrific to see. So those are the countries. Those are just a snapshot of the Islamic world, and we're seeing the sky-high rates of inbreeding. Now, going back to Pakistan, again, the average is 65%, but some regions are seeing rates as high as 85%, particularly in rural areas, and we're seeing 77%, I believe, of the birth defects are all as a result of these couples. It'd be hard to get away from those kinds of statistics when basically everyone in your country is engaged in first cousin marriage or something like that. And I thought I'd just show a video here of what this actually means, what this actually looks like for people who are doing this and what's happening to their kids. So let's watch this video here.
Mohsin has a rare genetic disease which is gradually destroying his body. He was born with it because his mother and father are first cousins. More than half of British Pakistanis marry their first cousins. Tonight on Dispatches, the tragic consequences of a cultural practice that is devastating children's lives. Mohsin Akhtar is 17 years old and lives with his family in Bradford. He's the second of 6 children. He's blind, he can't walk properly, and needs round-the-clock care. Mohsin is losing his hearing, his speech is seriously impaired, and he understands little of what's happening around him. Mohsin is obsessed with the idea of driving, not realising this will never be possible. Mohsin's younger sister Hina is 13. She's the Akhtar's 4th child. Her sister Zainab is 11. Both sisters have inherited the same disease as Mohsin. They can neither see nor hear. All 3 children have an extremely rare genetic disorder called mucolipidosis type 4. Their bodies cannot get rid of waste products properly, affecting everyday brain function from vision to movement. The potential consequences of first cousin marriages are tragic and devastating. My grandparents are first cousins. 5 of their daughters died in childhood, and 3 of my uncles were born deaf. At the time, no one knew why because the facts were not known. Today, the medical facts are established, but the practice continues. Here in Bradford, where the Akhtars live, 75% of Pakistanis marry their first cousins. Anywhere between 4 and 10% of the children in these families will be born with genetic abnormalities. And these illnesses are often fatal. 1/3 of children with diseases caused by recessive genes will die before they turn 5.
There we go. Just absolutely tragic. And yet, the UK government is refusing to make it illegal. And one of the reasons for it is that the Labour Party, when it comes to the Labour Party in particular, they rely on the Muslim vote to keep them in power. And they know that the Muslims all love this stuff, because one of the reasons they love this stuff is that it's one of the entries into getting mass migration and bringing family over, right? So you get one Pakistani guy come over, he brings his cousin over because he wants to marry her, so he marries his cousin, and then the cousin can bring over other family members and so on, and they have kids, and then they bring their other cousins, and then before you know it, you've got like half the family over from Pakistan living in the UK, living off of the benefit system. And so the gateway to one of the UK's problems when it comes to immigration and people living off the benefit system is inbreeding, and how this is not being made illegal because the Labour Party want to stay in power. So it's power and money. And as a result, the children are suffering, and parents are knowingly doing this. You know, that kid in that video is like one of several children in just one household where the parents knew their cousins, they knew that their kids are going to be born with this kind of stuff and are continuing to do it. We're talking about billions and billions in taxpayer money being funneled into supporting this kind of Ponzi scheme where the children are the victims. And it does get worse. So let's just watch this video here.
In the UK, politicians are terrified of this issue. In a country hyper-aware of racism and Islamophobia, raising the topic of cousin marriage in Muslim communities is political suicide. Only a handful of MPs have dared speak up. Ann Cryer, former MP for Kaylee, was one. In the early 2000s, she pointed to the skyrocketing rates of genetic disorders in Bradford's Pakistani community and called for public awareness campaigns. She was immediately attacked, called racist, called Islamophobic, accused of stigmatizing brown families. The backlash was so fierce that most of her colleagues learned the lesson: stay quiet. And they have. Even in 2024, when Conservative MP Richard Holden introduced a bill to ban first-cousin marriage in the UK. Prime Minister Keir Starmer blocked it. Opposition MP Iqbal Mohammed argued the practice shouldn't be stigmatized and instead encouraged genetic screening for couples. The bill died.
I'm just going to pause it. We're talking about their children that white British conservatives are trying to help protect, right? But they themselves are trying to block those bills that would protect their own children. Like, where are the feminists? Where are the liberals used to care about this kind of stuff. Like, the left wing used to care about this stuff. And now the left wing are just completely on the side of like these backwards ideas that are just hurting everyone. I just don't get it.
Cousin marriage remains fully legal in the UK, as it is across Europe, across the Middle East, across South Asia. No Muslim-majority country bans it. None. Meanwhile, doctors in the NHS are pressured to tread carefully. Some have been told not to single out Pakistani families in public health messaging, even though the data is crystal clear.
Why?
A 2022 briefing from Bradford health officials described cousin marriage as a cultural practice and compared it to white women having children after age 34, as if those risks are remotely equivalent. The document framed both as personal choices influenced by liberal values like careers and fitness.
Liberal values. So apparently marrying your cousin and producing a lot of babies with life-debilitating illnesses is just a liberal thing. And just for the record, I do think it is part of this kind of secular liberal thing that has meant that so many women are having babies really late. Like, that's not a great thing either. But to compare the two is just incredible amounts of mental gymnastics.
It's the kind of bureaucratic language designed to avoid offending anyone, while children continue to suffer.
Yeah.
Religious leaders aren't helping either. Popular Islamic preacher Dr. Zakir Naik has publicly claimed that the risks of cousin marriage are negligible, dismissing genetic science in favor of cultural tradition. In Pakistan, many imams tell families that disabled children are simply God's test, a trial of faith rather than a preventable outcome. One Saudi survey in 2024 found that 23% of respondents, nearly 1 in 4, didn't even recognize that cousin marriage carries elevated genetic risks. Among those who did know, many downplayed it.
How?
And the silence isn't just from outsiders afraid of offending Muslims. It's also from within the communities themselves. Families are trapped between love and loyalty, between honoring their elders and protecting their children. Speaking out against cousin marriage can mean family exile, accusations of betrayal, being labeled too Western. For many young women, especially refusing a cousin match isn't really an option.
There's also this thing, I think it's in Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries, where like cousins are entitled, like if there's like a son of a brother and like his father has a brother who has a daughter or something, like he's entitled to that daughter. And if the daughter says no, then that family can often go and like murder the brother, or there's these honor killings because of this entitlement to the inbreeding choice. It's mad, and it just becomes really tribal and clan-based, and yeah.
But the silence isn't just maintaining the problem. In some places, the system actually rewards it. In many Muslim-majority countries, inheritance laws favor family marriages. Marrying your cousin ensures your father's wealth doesn't leave the extended family when you die. In Saudi Arabia and parts of the Gulf, this is explicit. Rich families openly strategize around keeping fortunes consolidated through relative marriages. The bride price, the money a groom's family pays to the bride's family, is typically half as expensive when marrying a cousin. For poor families, that alone can make cousin marriage the only financially viable option. Then there's transnational marriage. British Pakistanis, many of whom immigrated decades ago, frequently import spouses from Pakistan to maintain cultural ties with the homeland. And overwhelmingly, those imported spouses are cousins. Between 1992 and 1994, an estimated 57.6% of Pakistani marriages in Bradford involved a spouse brought over from Pakistan. In the late 1990s, in Oxford, 92% of transnational marriages among British Pakistanis were to relatives, 37 of 50 being first cousins. Why? Partly cultural preservation. British Pakistani families fear their children will become too British, losing touch with language, religion,
And why are
and
you living
tradition.
there then?
Importing a
It's
cousin
incredible.
from the village reinforces those ties. But there's also an immigration angle. Marrying a UK citizen grants a Pakistani spouse the right to live in Britain. For families in rural Pakistan struggling economically, having a daughter marry a British cousin is a golden ticket. It's not just a marriage, it's a migration pathway. And some families rely on this system, not despite the genetic risks, but simply because the economic pressures outweigh the health concerns.
Wow. Just incredible how they understand that not inbreeding is a Western thing. And if those families choose not to do it, then they fear that they've become too Western, despite it meaning better outcomes for the children. And there's this overall kind of low resentment boiling underneath the surface about the West. And yet they all decide to come to live in the West. And I just find it incredible. And it's partly the West's fault for allowing this and just being so naive to what's happening. But I want to now look at the West and look at the rates of inbreeding in Western countries and see what we find, okay? So when it comes to the United States, we see inbreeding rates of less than 0.1%. Now compare that to Pakistan, which is seeing up to 85% in some regions, but 65% on average. The US, the world's superpower economic engine, has an inbreeding rate of less than 0.1%. If we look at Canada, also about 1%, and I wonder whether it's higher there because of the amount of people from Asian countries that are now living there. I don't know. The UK, 1.1% inbreeding rate. Again, how much of that is migrants in the statistics? France, 2.6%. Now, that's a jump, and it's one of the highest in Europe, kind of Christian or formerly Christian countries. And I'm wondering, again, whether that's a result of the large numbers of North Africans living in France. Germany, 2%, Spain, 2%, Italy, 1.1%, Portugal, 1.5%, Belgium, 1%, Norway, 0.7%, Hungary, 0.5%, and then we have Australia as 0.2%, so all the way down here. And you could ask the question of, like, how did we get here? At what point in history did we suddenly start going, actually, I think we've had enough of cousin marriage, and we're going to move on to something else? Like, how did we get there? And that's a fascinating history that I just want to run through very quickly. So you'll be surprised to learn that the Christian world's attitude towards cousin marriage was already changing in the first centuries of Christianity. This is even something that was being outlawed and banned before the time of Muhammad. A lot of Muslims will say, well, look, back when Muhammad was around, cousin marriage was absolutely normal and celebrated and normalized, and it's all great and everything, even in the Christian world and so on. But these are all lies, because we can see that St. Basil the Great in the 330 to 379 AD era is talking in his canonical letters that marriage between close relatives are incestuous and prescribes penances for them. St. Gregory of Nyssa, again, the same kind of period, 335 AD, strongly links sexual morality with human dignity and opposes incest and sexual relationships that blur family boundaries. St. Augustine, around 354 AD to 430 AD, says that cousin marriage, though once permitted, should be avoided because it weakens the social fabric, concentrates families inward instead of expanding bonds outward, which is a key concept of love in Christianity, is loving your neighbor, right? Just think about that. You have like your tribe or your village, and instead of just constantly inbreeding in your own village, you love, even romantically, your neighboring village, your neighboring town, your neighboring area. And it's this outward sense. And what this meant also, as we're going to get into in a second, is that this started to mean that people began trusting strangers, right? People that were further away from them, and created these bonds of trust and love across distances, which meant that they started trusting people outside of their immediate family, which revolutionized the psychology of the people who adopted this, and basically all of the West and Europe as a result, and just radicalized, just completely transformed the world as a result. You have councils and canon laws around the 5th to 7th century. This is right around the time of Islam and the birth of Muhammad and the lifetime of Muhammad, where church councils start issuing concrete rules that condemns marriage with close relatives and prescribes exclusion from communion. You see the forbidding of marriage up to a certain degree of kinship. You see in the Council of Orleans in 511 explicitly banning the marriage between cousins. This is about 100 years before Islam, I believe. Like, it's certainly several decades before the birth of Muhammad, and about a century before the expansion of Islam. The Council of Tours in 567 AD extends prohibitions further and imposes penances. And in the Byzantine Orthodox development, you see the influence heavily by St. Basil's canons, cousin marriage increasingly treated as incestuous. And by the time of Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, Roman law and church law align. First cousin marriage is forbidden. Again, this is in the lifetime of Muhammad. So before anyone from the Islamic world says, well, it was a normal thing, it was legal, even the Christians were doing it, no. And I find this idea fascinating, that Christ, when he says to love your neighbor, and there are so many levels of meaning whenever Christ says something, but you can take something quite literally here and say that Christ commanding us to love our neighbor may have been one of the factors in us starting to look at expanding our love beyond just our own tribal network, our own clan, our own family and blood links, and to start loving people beyond that, and knowing that we are all one in Christ Jesus. And I think that's just such a beautiful, beautiful concept that just completely changed the world. And then, of course, you can look at the medieval expansion between the 8th and 12th centuries, where marriage was even forbidden within 7 degrees of kinship, and this would include even very, very distant cousins. Just incredible to think, like, just the night and day differences there. Because Christianity viewed marriage as sacred, protective of women and children, creating new bonds rather than reinforcing clan power. And didn't view marriage as transactional, where you are just purchasing your wife, as you still see today in various countries in Africa and the Middle East and that are Islamic. And it just completely changed the way that marriage was viewed as something that was purely transactional. That doesn't say that it never happened, particularly in the kind of royal ruling families and political figures of the time. But from the church, which is trying to align the laws of the land with the teachings of Christ, you're already seeing that changes happen in the earlier centuries of Christianity. The ban on cousin marriages, basically, it weakened tribalism. It broke dynamic sexual control, prevented elite inbreeding, even though it still sometimes happened, expanded social trust, separated sexuality from blood hierarchy. And I love this quote from this anthropologist, Joseph Henrich, who said that the church's marriage bans transformed Europe psychologically and socially forever. I'm just adding that bit forever in because it did change it forever. So much so that today, people that are not Christian but live in the West take for granted, and they just assume as normal, the idea of monogamy, and that marriages are not transactional, and that you shouldn't marry your cousins, and all of this like very long list of things that we take for granted when it comes to sexual relationships and partners and things like that, we take completely for granted. And yet they did not come from nowhere, they've come from Christianity. So much so that even many Muslims today are like, this cousin marriage thing is causing problems, we don't like it, and clearly the West is doing it better, and that's why so many families in Islamic cultures are scared that their kids are becoming too Western. And anyway, I just find all of this stuff fascinating, and I've heard no one else talk about it, and so I'll take this opportunity to just share a few more points here. Basically, in kin-based societies, loyalty flows to the family, to the clan, to the tribe. Just think about the violence that breeds. I think it's in Rwanda, there was a big genocide between the Hutus and the Tutsis and stuff. These are just clan violence that erupt in these like machete massacres all across Africa that's still part of this kind of tribal clan-based way of living. and just the volatility that this breeds. And so if you've got all this volatility, how can you trust people? How can you go to a hospital and trust that the doctor's not going to kill you because he's part of a different clan than you? Like, these things matter into the boring realities of daily life. It means you just can't trust people at the end of the day. And so crime increases. You have to put big fences around your compound, barbed wire, CCTV all the time. And you could argue that all of this stuff that we're seeing in the modern world, with all the surveillance and everything else, has been as a result of us departing from Christ, departing from Christianity. It's worth thinking about. Anyway, justice was personal and retaliatory. The trust stops at bloodlines. Power concentrates in extended families. However, by breaking these bonds, Christianity forced people to start trusting non-relatives for the first time, bringing them into the fold of your inheritance and sharing money and estates and those kinds of things. Suddenly, money became less of a priority and more about love between people, and as a sacrament of your relationship with God. Form voluntary associations, not forced kind of marriages. Would rely on institutions instead of kin. You develop a rule-based justice rather than blood revenge. And so this was the foundation of guilds, universities, monasteries, hospitals, corporations, representative governance. Just think about that. In other words, high trust societies. Now, were Christians the first to do this? Yes, pretty much they were the first. Now, there's a few lists here of, like, basically in ancient Rome, there was already some discouragement of close kin marriages, but there was basically no enforcement, and the elites regularly did it, and it never really dismantled clan logic at scale. Same with China and ancient Greece and India and so on. It remained common, cousin marriages, kinship still dominated. Islam, by contrast, basically glorified it, said it was great. And as you can see in that video earlier on, it said, well, because it's from Muhammad and Allah, it must therefore be good. And so really, Christianity was the first to do this as a kind of world-changing force. It's just, I think it's so beautiful to think of it like that. Yeah. And so basically, going back to that anthropologist, Joseph Henrich, the church's marriage bans literally rewired Western psychology. I'll say that again. The church's marriage bans on inbreeding and cousin marriage rewired Western psychology. It produced populations that are less tribal, more individualist, more trusting of strangers, more law-oriented. Now, of course, this is a very oversimplified version of this. Even in my mind right now, there are so many things I want to talk about here when it comes to individualism and stuff like that, but I just don't have time in this video. But just take this as a snapshot and go away and think about it, because I think it's just fascinating. But listen to this final quote from this anthropologist. He said, Christianity dismantled kinship, right? All these cousin marriages, and accidentally built the modern world as a result. That is definitely worth thinking about. So there we have it, an examination of inbreeding and Islam and the consequences of that on society, not only on the health of individuals who are born from these families, but also how the culture and the fabric of society changes as a result, especially when we compare that to Christian societies and what is different about them and what are the downstream effects of the different belief systems of the Islamic world and the Christian world. And I've got to say, I do find it fascinating and almost very frustrating to see that so many people from the Islamic world have not put two and two together to understand that it is because of Islam, because of Sharia law, because of all the things that come from this, including cousin marriage, that has resulted in their countries being cursed with societies that don't function, and just massive amounts of distrust and violence and corruption and health effects and a long list of this. And yet, when they try to leave these places because they're so terrible and come to the West, they want to still bring with them the ideas that ruined their countries and come to the West and live off of the wealth that was created because of an exactly different type of society. And, they want to bring with them cousin marriage. They want to bring with them Sharia courts. They want to bring with them, their jihad and everything else. Because for many people leaving the Islamic world to come and live in the West for a better life, for better money and opportunity, They just often think that Islam just wasn't implemented properly. Sharia law wasn't implemented properly where they've come from. It needs to be tried again, right? And so they continue trying it and trying it. Every country that tries it all across, as you can see, this Middle Eastern band, all of these desertified countries. You can literally see this area here and all up here, Islamic. You've got still some Christians in this green part here. All of these desertified countries are all the products of basically Sharia law and Islam, and they're all dictatorships. They're all tyrannical. They are all filled with leaders who are squandering the wealth. And I've got to say, increasingly, we are seeing the same thing happen to Europe as a result of it abandoning God, abandoning Christ, abandoning, they want to still enjoy the fruits of Christian thinking and values, but want to cut itself off from the branch of faith. And that flower or that fruit will rot. It's only a matter of time. But anyway, there we have it. This has been a longer video than usual. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Comment down below. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. It helps me out immensely. And I'll speak to you in the next one. God bless.